Guten Abend miteinander, herzlich willkommen. Es ist ein lauer Sommerabend, aber wir freuen uns, dass Sie da sind. Und wir eröffnen jetzt das Festival hochoffiziell. Ich bin der Nik Bärtsch, Festival-Co-Kurator und Exil-Co-Founder. And next to me, you see Judd Greenstein, also co-curator of this first Indie Classical Festival Zürich. He came from New York today, and he's also co-founder of the Now ensemble that we can hear on Friday and Saturday. And Judd will also play some work of his own. So he's not only a co-founder, but also a composer and musician. And we are actually all, also the third co-curator, Etienne Abelin, we are all musicians and want to present what we like and what we want to promote somehow and to show to you. So we quickly introduce now together. Hello, Judd. Very nice to have you here. You want to say some words about how this connection with Etienne started, actually?
Sure, I'll just say a few. I'm sorry, my German isn't good enough to use. But Etienne contacted me when he was starting his group Classical and his Y band, which some of you may know. And Etienne is very interested in many of the same things that I am in New York, and I know that Nik is here as well, which is trying to open up the classical music tradition, by which we mean anything that is, coming out of the tradition of obviously Bach and Schubert and Beethoven, but also contemporary practices, and opening that up to all different musics without any regard to genre. In fact, we think about this really as a post-genre music. So we're trying to get away from the idea of genre as being the definitive way of structuring sound. Instead, we're thinking about music as being open to all influences so that we as composers can tap into all the music that we've ever listened to and loved and bring it into our tradition, which in my case still involves 5 lines on the page and little dots and lines and people who play violin and trumpet and things like that. So you'll hear some of my music and my take on that, but over the course of tonight and the next 3 nights after this, you'll hear many ensembles and many composers who in some way are involved in that tradition. Nik, do you want to give a few thoughts about where you're coming from on this?
Yeah, for me it's actually the same. I played a lot of funk and jazz music till I was 16. We were talking about this before, and then I jumped into classical music and had to train really a lot, and then I studied actually classical music. So I'm one of these persons that we find today also all over the place that are familiar with classical but also pop and indie and funk and jazz culture. People played this and started to understand the culture and not only to copy it or to listen to it. And that leads to new interesting combinations and somehow a new understanding what interpretation, improvisation, but also composition is. And as we know in tradition, for many centuries, composition, interpretation, and improvisation was very much connected. So many of the great composers were good improvisers, actually, like Bach or Mozart. So, to come back to the whole program, I quickly tell you what happens, because today we have 2 bands that are quite amplified, and we have also bands tomorrow and on Friday and Saturday that also show the chamber music aspects of the indie classical scene a bit more. So I will tell you what we have in this festival, and then we can maybe come back to tonight to the 2 bands, UFO and Dawn of Midi, that you actually invited, Dawn of Midi. We all invited some bands, and UFO was invited by Etienne Abelin. I will tell something about this. So today we have Dawn of Midi and UFO. Dawn of Midi is from Brooklyn, also New York, or from mostly, and UFO is from Basel, I think. And tomorrow we have Etienne's Ypsilon Night special, so my own band, Mobile Extended. Mobile, the acoustic group with 2 percussionists and bass clarinet with a string quintet. And Shara Worden, my brightest diamond, also with ensemble from musicians from here and from your ensemble that playing before. And then on Friday and Saturday, maybe you want to say about something about your ensemble and these 2 days?
Sure. Yeah, so Friday we will have a presentation of Penelope by Sarah Kirkland Snyder, which is release that we had on New Amsterdam Records that was one of the, I think, defining albums for our scene. It's an orchestral work, but a chamber orchestra. In this case, it'll be kind of a large chamber ensemble with Shara Warden also singing the vocals. And it tells this beautiful story taken from the myth of Ulysses, but it really brings together Shara's own approach to the craft of the voice with Sarah's songwriting skills, which really draw off of not just the classical tradition, but also indie rock and everything like that. And that night we'll also have, I'm playing a set with Michi Bianco, doing mostly her music, maybe a little bit of mine. That's a violin and Fender Rhodes and electronics combination. And then Michael Mizrahi will give a piano set, doing a number of composers from the United States, including also some reflections off of classical composers. Then we're doing a Yannick Giger work for wind ensemble, which is really fantastic and textural and beautiful. And then on Saturday, we have too much to really talk about. My group, the Now Ensemble, is going to play a set that includes a film. There's lots of film and visual work throughout that evening. We'll also have Sarah Neufeld from Arcade Fire, and so many other, Elia Rediger of the Bianca Story. So a lot of special guests. Nik has a fantastic open form piece that we're all going to play together. So I really recommend coming out. And that show is across the street, right? Yeah. Also Friday.
So,
introduce this show.
Yeah. Okay, we are already actually in philosophy and talking about all this post-genre music. But on Saturday, there is actually a panel at 6 o'clock at Moods, because Friday and Saturday is at Moods, and we're talking about new classical music and why we call it indie classical. So, to come back to tonight, we have UFO and Dawn of MIDI. Actually, before, when I asked the UFO guys, what actually did you study? Did you go to a jazz school, or did you learn it by yourself, or to classical music? The answer was very short. They said, well, all sorts of educations. So already here you see that the young guys mix the music and especially their culture in which they grow up, in their musical culture. So they maybe learn languages, then they develop it into a dialect, and suddenly they have a slang as a band. They have musical jokes, you know, they're speaking their own language. Now, the second band that we will hear, Dawn of MIDI, you invited. Maybe you can say a few words and then we are off stage to make space for music.
Enough. But just to say about Dawn of MIDI, they're one of the most exciting groups to emerge in New York today. I've known about their work for a long time, and last year they came out with a record called Dysnomia that really took their own compositional practices to another level. They're a jazz trio in terms of the instrumentation. It's an amplified jazz trio, but they've woven into this drumming practices actually from around the world, and brought that into their own sensibilities, which draw off of many different types of music. They actually charted on the iTunes electronic music chart. So that gives you an idea, even though they're actually not an electronic music group at all. They're just 3 instruments that are amplified, but there's no electronics involved. And yet their music brings this kind of dance sensibility, this real deep sense of groove and rhythm that will get you moving, I guarantee it. But it's incredibly sophisticated, and they actually performed on my festival, the Ecstatic Music Festival in New York, with another group called Brightwave that includes Michi Bianco, who you would hear on Friday night. So there's a lot of connections here, lots of overlap, and I think these are 2 fantastic groups to kick off this year's festival. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much. Danke vielmals. Wir freuen uns, wenn ihr weiterverzählt, dass es das Festival überhaupt gibt. Wir machen das nämlich das erste Mal, und es ist wichtig, dass spread the word, dass es umgeht und dass wir jeden Tag mehr Leute haben. Wegen dem machen wir es auch, um die Grenzen zu sprengen. Vielen Dank. Please welcome now on stage UFO from Basel. Thank you very much.